Hello again everyone, welcome back to another episode of Final Fantasy Brave Exvius. My name is Mars. Today we're going to be doing the complete guide on Madam Edel, and I know it's overdue, but at least it's coming to you the last day that you have the opportunity to pull on her banner, just in case you've been holding out, trying to make a decision for yourself. Hopefully this helps you come to a conclusion. Madam Edel is a very powerful physical damage dealer who prefers Earth Element, but can be kitted out to handle basically any element that you need her to dish out. Before jumping into her rotation, let's talk real quick about her TMR and her STMR. Madam Edel's TMR is called Leader of the Soiree, and it is a materia that grants 30% attack as well as 20% attack with a gun or a fist respectively, which means that you can get plus 70% attack when you have both equipped. And you'll find out that with Madam Edel, you typically want both as much as you can. Her STMR is also very nice. It's called Grand Reverie, and it is a clothing chest piece with 55 flat attack, which is currently the highest in the game, as well as plus 10 defense, and a passive called Frontier Spirit that gives 30% attack when equipped with a fist. Right, that's what it is? 30% with a fist? Yeah, and it also gives you stop immunity, so it's unique in a couple of regards, but it is very nice. I'm a huge fan of it. I picked it up simply because I plan on using Madam Edel a lot, and I really wanted that item to accompany her. So with Madam Edel, let's talk real quick about the way her rotation works. It is kind of different from a lot of other damage dealers because she doesn't actually have a strict rotation per se. She has more of a priority system. So you'll see with Madam Edel, there are a number of things that you can do in a given turn because she has a whole bunch of skills. But the bottom line is, if you follow this little flow chart of priority, then you should be good to go. The first, of course, is you want to make sure that you are using an element that favors the fight. So Madam Edel has two personal imbues, one for Earth and one for Dark. Earth, of course, is the element that you want to be using as much as possible, and we'll get to that in a second. If you cannot use it, then there's also nothing wrong with imbuing externally, as well as equipping an elemental weapon of whatever type that you need. So if you're starting your turn and she doesn't have an element on, you got to make sure that you either imbue it on her or you have that weapon equipped. The second thing in the order of priority is to make sure that your target is imperiled, and this goes, these are just basics, right? Any damage dealer, you'd want to follow this, but with Madam Edel, she comes with it all baked into her kit. In Madam Edel's case, the imperiling move that you want to use is World Crusher, and that's because it applies a 120% Earth imperil. This is why you do want to favor using Earth damage with Madam Edel, because 120% imperil on demand is pretty crazy. So if you have her equipped with an Earth weapon, or you have her imbued with Earth, and then you imperil by 120%, your damage is going to be awesome. Now the next thing in order of priorities is to use one of her cooldown skills. She has 4 different cooldown skills that are each available it comes out to, when you're using her rotation, it will feel like every 3 turns. So one cooldown is available on turn 3, one is available on turn 6, one is available on turn 9, and one is available on turn 12. And they have cooldowns that match the turn count that they arrive on. So the 3-turn cooldown, this is hard to say. The cooldown that is available on turn 3 has a cooldown of 3 turns. The one that's available on turn 6 has a 6-turn cooldown. So those you want to use as soon as they come up. And the reason for that is because these cooldowns give buffs to Madam Edel's modifiers on her abilities, and most importantly, it gives modifiers to Heaven Earth Assault, which is her most powerful chaining ability. So you absolutely want to be using these cooldowns as soon as they're available. The nice thing about these buffs is that they last for 9,999 turns, and they cannot be dispelled, which means that as long as your Madam Edel lives, you don't have to worry about them ever falling off. You just use the cooldown one time to get that modifier boost, and then you're good to go. Oftentimes, I multicast these cooldown skills with Heaven Earth Assault, so I'll, select her multicast skill, select the cooldown skill, and then select Heaven Earth Assault, because I do believe once you start getting those modifier boosts, it does do more damage than just using the cooldown skill by itself. Another thing in the order of priorities, number 4 is to use her Limit Burst, and you only do this once per fight for the same reason that you use each of her cooldowns once per fight, as long as she stays alive, right? And that's because her LB also gives her modifier boosts to Heaven, Earth, Assault. So the cooldown skills, you only need to use once each. So the 3-turn cooldown, for example, you'll use it on turn 3. It'll be available again on turn 6, but you don't need to use it again. Don't touch it. Just use it the one time that you need it, and then you're done. Same goes for the limit burst. Use it one time, and then you have that modifier boost forever and ever and ever until she dies. And that's that. And so once you have all those priority things out of the way, that's when you want to be using Heaven, Earth, Assault, and that ability is her most powerful chaining ability, and you would use it with another Madam Edel. Now, you will notice with a priority system like this, you will have a number of turns where you're like, yeah, I don't have a lot going on. I've already used my limit burst, I'm already imbued, I'm already imperiled, and I could either chain, or one thing that you can do to increase your damage in the mid-fight is to use Shining Art Descending Gem Strike. And Gem Strike is a finishing move that consumes Madam Edel's entire limit burst gauge. So this is something that if you've already used her LB for the modifier boost and you're waiting for your next cooldown, or you want to do some burst damage, because it does hit very hard. It's a very powerful finishing move. You can throw this in with the mid-fight. I typically use one Madam Edel to chain with a support unit and then finish with my other Madam Edel to go ahead and get that Gem Strike extra bonus damage on a given turn where it's available. I just say use this as much as you can reasonably accommodate, and that's because it will increase your overall damage output, and it is very bursty, so it's a good way to push thresholds. It's a good way to just finish off a boss. Use it if you want to get damage sooner. Her safe and stable rotation, you don't necessarily have to do that because you'll get to her ramped up damage anyways. Now, speaking of her damage, a lot of people, because of this whole delayed gratification sort of mechanic with Madam Edel, you will notice that you don't get all of her damage up front. She is somebody who takes a little while to ramp up, but once she is ramped up, she does pretty much more damage than any other character in the game, and it's not even close. It's not even close. Like how sometimes when you're fighting a boss and, you get the boss down to their last threshold and they enrage and they just kill your whole party? Well, don't forget, the first time you ran into Madam Edel was when she was a boss. She was a boss encounter sort of thing, and when you pushed her final threshold, she just killed your entire team, right? She just wipes you. Her damage kind of is emblematic of that, where after she's finished ramping up, and it takes about 12 turns to do so, she basically goes into full enrage mode and just wipes everybody in her path. It really is such a tremendous amount of damage. So to illustrate this, so that you kind of understand what it looks like, I've taken data from Furcula's spreadsheet that you can find on the FFBE subreddit, and I know that these comparisons are not always perfect, they're not always hyper ideal, they're not always representative of how you might realistically use something. With all of those disclaimers aside, it's an easy way for me to avoid having to do math myself and to have to explain all the justifications behind it. Just say, hey, this is somebody else's math, and for comparison purposes, we're just going to look at trend lines, okay? So the accuracy is not super important, though it does tend to be pretty accurate within the parameters that they set. So this first chart here that I've made compares 20 turns of Aldor King Rain's damage versus Madam Edel. And you'll notice that King Rain beats her by quite a bit within the first 6 or 7 turns, after which Madam Edel pulls ahead and stays ahead for the rest of the fight, and it's not even close. So if you're one of those type of people who doesn't mind waiting a few turns, or hanging out for a few turns, or doing lower damage for a few turns, or doing some gem strikes for a few turns, the reward is that you get substantially higher damage. Even King Rain's top burst turns doesn't beat Madam Edel's regular chaining ability once she's stacked out. And it doesn't even take her that long to overtake him. Like, she does more damage than King Rain by about turn 7 or 8. And then conclusively by turn 10, she's pulled 50% ahead of him in terms of overall damage output. Cumulatively across all turns. So that's a little comparison for you there to kind of understand what her damage looks like. And the reason that her damage may not look super high in spreadsheets and stuff is because they tend to cut off her rotation at about turn 14, which is totally fine, because at turn 12 she's maxed out on damage, and adding extra turns of damage is superfluous because she has an asymptotal damage curve that approaches a number but never actually touches it. So, it's very hard to get like an average damage per turn number on Madam Edel, so she's often underrepresented if your fight is going to take, up to 12, 14, 15, 20 turns. So that's a little note regarding that. Now, if you want to compare against another very popular damage dealer such as Xuanwu and Qinglong, you can see that she has a similar pattern where for the first several turns, Xuanwu and Qinglong are well ahead of her. This particular chart also represents using the triple Magnus ability by turn 3, I believe. You may not necessarily do that in all cases, but you'll see that the triple Magnus ability does how much damage Madam Edel does by turn 13. So, and Madam Edel can do that every single turn for the rest of the fight. So that's something to keep in mind. It only takes, it only takes about 5 turns for Madam Edel's turn-by-turn damage to overtake Xuanwu and Qinglong's, and then by the time she hits her maximum damage, she's more than doubling Xuanwu and Qinglong's outgoing damage on a turn-by-turn basis. So if you want damage up front, someone like Xuanwu and Qinglong is a better option, of course, but if you want somebody who can kind of last out a longer fight and provide really crazy damage by the end, then that's where Madam Edel fits in. Now, of course, a lot of people are very curious how Madam Edel fits into future meta, because I think it's very common for her to not be used by JP players. I don't 100% know why that is, but what I can tell you is that this chart represents the damage of Odin Reagan versus Madam Edel, and Odin Reagan is one of the more popular picks in JP these days that I've heard of. I've heard a lot of people hype him, talk about him, whatever. He does represent a very high tier of damage in JP as their meta stands currently. So I've gone ahead and overlaid Odin Reagan's damage with Madam Edel's, and you'll see that Odin Reagan is probably better on average just because he's going to get higher damage sooner. You're going to get a couple of burst rotations within a 10-turn rotation, but then by turn 13 or 14, you're looking at Madam Edel, who is actually catching up, and because her damage every turn once she's ramped up is so high, she effectively catches up to Odin Reagan. So Reagan will stay ahead for a good 10 turns on his turn per turn damage. Cumulative damage, he'll stay ahead for a little bit while longer, but once you reach Madam Edel's full enraged and stack damage, she does actually maintain pretty decent competitiveness with Odin Reagan. So that's just for you to get an idea of what her damage looks like when compared to other damage dealers. It does require a little bit of ramp up but by no means is her damage before turn 12 low. It's definitely good damage, and it even beats out other popular damage dealers already, like Alder King Rain. Like her turn 5 damage I think is higher, and from then on out her turn per turn is higher. So just keep that in mind. She is completely different from any other damage dealer we currently have out there. You give up on early damage in exchange for crazy high damage in the end fight, which in my opinion that's what it's all about. I don't care if it takes me a few extra turns to get to that point. Now, let's talk real quick about how you can build Madam Edel for yourself. We are very fortunate in that Madam Edel is pretty friendly to newer players or to players who have been playing for a little while. She does benefit from a handful of TMRs and STMRs, but as you can see, she is pretty easy to get up and running. This first build that we're looking at is a TMR only build. This includes only TMRs and free items. Of course, any build where earth damage is acceptable, you want to be using Beloved Edel. This is Madam Edel's personal gun, and you get this by completing the Madam's Manor story stuff. It does take a good few hours, so it is a little bit of a slog, but you do get an STMR tier weapon for your Madam Edel, and it synergizes perfectly with her. It is super, super good. It gives 50% attack, 50% HP. It's like 152 attack or something like that, and it's earth element. So it's literally the perfect weapon for her, and it's available to everyone. You just gotta survive the little bit of a slog to get it, and then bam, it's yours. You'll use it in every single fight that doesn't immune earth because it is so very good for her. Now in this particular build, the other weapon that we're using is Tiger Fangs, which is another free item that you get from a trial, and this is one of the highest attack fists, or maybe the highest, because I don't think fists go that high yet, and this activates all of her passives for fists, and gives Aquan Killer if you need it, which you probably don't. The other TMRs include stuff like Power Amplifier, which is Regina's TMR, which gives attack with a gun, as well as Scarlet Moon, which is Carton's TMR that gives 50% attack with fists. And I know this is a limited time item, however, it did come with a raid, so if you really wanted to use it, you could use a Prism on, one of the raid Moogles that came with this, and get it yourself, even if you never actually pulled Carton, which actually could make it a little bit more budget friendly than actually getting the unit itself and getting his TMR. So, it's a little bit of a wash. There are other chess pieces that you could replace that with. This build also uses a pair of Storm Kickers for the flat attack. The LB damage boost is kind of irrelevant since you only use her limit burst once per fight, but it does give 20% HP each, which helps out with her tankiness. This build also has dual form to cap out her true dual wield attack. She does need 100% equipped from, whatever sources you're using. And then her TMR is equipped, Leader of the Soiree, which gives that 70% attack. So this build is actually 390% attack, so if you have slightly better item world rolls on Beloved Edel and Tiger Fangs, you can recover that. Or if you had something like AI Katy Perry's Super TMR, you can get an extra 20% attack from that as well. And you'll notice this build also has a free materia slot, and the reason I left this is because we have our one Maneater Plus equipped, so we have Diabolos, the Esper for Maneater, and then we have Maneater Plus, so that's 200% Maneater right there. We have a free materia slot that you can decide what to do with. Of course, if you want more damage, you would use that slot to equip an additional killer, which is kind of crazy. Or you could equip her with something like Adamantine or Chocobo Adventure or whatever it's called if you want to help her out with her tankiness. Because it is one of the things that people often say against Madam Edel is that she has low tankiness, because as you'll see, her spirit is very low. And that is perfectly fine. It's a very valid reason to maybe not love Madam Edel, but the thing to keep in mind is that it's very easy to build her with a lot of extra HP and extra spirit and stuff like that, because she is able to be built with free slots. So speaking of free slots, let's take a look at the STMR build. This one is even better, and this one has even more HP, and for some reason even less spirit. It's probably because I left some open slots. This build follows a similar principle where you're using Beloved Edel. Like I said, you always want to be using that if you can. Wildfang Heirloom is Carton's STMR. If you don't have it, don't worry about it. You can always use Tiger Fangs, Tifa's STMR, or Prisha's STMR, like any fist will do. I use Wildfang Heirloom because that gives me 50% true dual wield and allows me to free up an additional slot. Which it may not actually even free up a slot. I could probably use a high attack fist, and this build overcaps on attack by like 60% or 70%, with rare item world rolls and stuff like that. The red Helibor is there for the high flat attack. Grand Reverie is Madam Edel's own Super TMR. And then the double Coin of Fate Sabin, and that's kind of a ridiculous element to the build. Not everybody has that, but this was something I specifically planned for, okay? You have to understand, when Madam Edel came out in JP, Sabin came out shortly after that in Global, and I knew what I was doing. I was like, bro, I gotta get me some of this Monk Sabin Occults, and he's been a crazy good damage dealer for me, and his STMR has allowed me to do a build like this. To finish off the build, I've got Yin Yang Dual Hand to cap out the true dual wield, since Wildfang Heirloom gives us the other 50% we need. And then that leaves me 3 open materia slots for killers or extra tankiness or whatever. And that's a huge amount of build flexibility. That ultimately is what I really, really like about Madam Edel. Now, another thing regarding her builds is she can equip all kinds of weapons, so use the builder to advise you on which weapons you should build when fighting particular opponents, because there may be times where you want to use Longinus, for example, for the Fairy Killer, or other weapons like that to maximize on killers. So just consult the builder and follow that. Another thing to note about her builds is that you could also build her with like a double AI Katy Perry Super TMR if you happen to have 2 of those. Not many people do, but I do figure it's worth mentioning because there are alternate builds to the double Sabin Coin of Fate that work just fine, that are also very strong. So like double AI Katy Perry Super TMR, or Riku and Sora STMRs. Oh, sorry, double AI Katy Perry Super TMRs. I said that wrong. Yeah, double upgrade packages, or double using Riku and Sora from the Kingdom Hearts collabs STMRs. All of those are options. Basically just cap out that true dual wield, cap out that attack, and then oftentimes you'll have 2 or 3 slots for killers depending on where your gear is at. So that pretty much covers the build. As far as whether or not Madam Edel is worth pulling for, obviously this is going to be dependent on your playstyle and whether or not, you know, she's somebody that you feel like investing in. Her playstyle is something that I really like. I don't mind waiting 10 turns to get crazy damage, right? So for me, that is not an issue at all. I know she is innately a little bit squishy compared to other damage dealers because she does have the low spirit and requires a little bit of extra HP. But for me, that's not really an issue either because I've prepared for this, and as you can see in the TMR only build, you can build around it and it doesn't really take that much extra effort. My plan with Madam Edel is to just not pull another damage dealer. Like, I don't need to. Madam Edel's damage is more than sufficient to beat all trials that JP currently has within their allotted time count, or their turn count, because there are some that say, oh, beat within 20 turns or whatever. Madam Edel's got that covered. So as far as I'm concerned, done pulling on damage dealers. She's got everything that I need. She's very far ahead of our current damage output on damage dealers, albeit it just takes a few turns to get there. So for that reason, you know, she's an absolute must-have for me. But if you don't like her playstyle, or if you don't want to chance it on, you know, someone who you have to ramp up on, or you're not as confident with keeping her alive, or whatever, you're totally fine with not pulling her. I would not have missed her banner for anything, personally, just because I'm locked and loaded with some great build options for her. But yeah, bottom line is, you know, Madam Edel's damage is so high that you can pull her and then never pull another damage dealer for the foreseeable future. You could literally just hoard up and pull for kind of whatever you wanted because her damage is so high. She does require a little bit of finesse to get the damage that you may need in later fights, but ultimately she's a very worthwhile investment for me, and that's why I love her so much. So that just about covers it for today's complete unit guide about Madam Edel. Please let me know what you think of this video down in the comments below, and I'll see everybody in the next video.